All right, now let's start by adding a filter. So here in vehicle list, just above my table, I'm going to add a div with the class form-group. Inside this div, I'm going to have a label. And next to that, I'm going to have a select with the class form-control. So here's the structure. I'm going to give this an ID, make, and use it for the for attribute of the label. And here we call this make. Now in this select, I'm going to add a blank option, duplicate, apply the ng4 directive, let m of makes, and the value is going to be m.id, and the label is going to be m.name. Nothing new so far. Now let's initialize this drop-down list. So we go to our vehicle list component. I'm going to add this makes here, which is a key value pair array. And in ng on init, this.vehicle service.get makes, and subscribe to the result to initialize this.makes. Now we could use observable.forkjoin to send these requests in parallel. And then we could use that to display a loader while the page is loading. So we will hide the loader when both the drop-down list as well as the vehicles table are rendered. All right, so here's our make drop-down list on top of the vehicles table. Now we can apply another class here. So here in our form group, I'm also going to add this class called well. Again, another bootstrap class. And this puts our drop-down list in a nice gray box, making it stand out from the rest of the page. Now to implement filtering, I'm going to use a pattern here, and you can use the same pattern whether you have 1 filter or 10 filters. The implementation is exactly the same. So first in our component, I'm going to define a new field, filter, and initialize it to an empty object. Then I'm going to go back in the template and use ng-model on this drop-down list and bind it to filter.makeID. Next, I'm going to bind the change event of this drop-down list to a method called onFilterChange. Now let's implement this method. So back in our component, onFilterChange. Now I've seen some developers implement this method in a more procedural way. So they pass a parameter like makeID here. But you don't really have to do that. You can think more object-oriented. So instead of passing parameters between your functions, you use your class to keep the state. So here we're using this filter field to keep the state. And with this, we can have a method with no parameters. And here we can access this.filter.makeID or whatever. So try to reduce the number of parameters in your method. The best methods, as Uncle Bob says, are methods that have no parameters. Because these methods are part of a class, and in that class you have all the state. So why do you want to pass parameters between your methods? Now 1 parameter is good, 2 parameters is okay, 3 parameters is on the edge, but 4 parameters and beyond is really bad. So try to avoid that. Now with this pattern, you can have 10 other filters and it doesn't matter what their type is. You can have a text box, a radio button, a drop-down list, a checkbox. With each input field, you use the ng-model directive to bind it to a property of this filter object. And then you handle the change event and bind it to this onFilterChange without any arguments. Now, in some applications, when we're dealing with large data sets, perhaps we don't want to apply the filter every time the user changes the value of one of these input fields. So we can have a separate button, and when the user clicks that button, we apply the filter. This way, they can change multiple filters, click the button, and then filtering happens only once. In that case, instead of handling the change event here, you would handle the click event of the filter button. So in this method, we're going to implement filtering. Now we can filter on the client or on the server. In the next lecture, I'm going to show you how to filter the data on the client. And in the following lecture, I will show you how to do it on the server.